All right, so let's look back up at our thesis again. Here are specific guidelines. I'm a great literary critic. Rhyme, word choice, maligns bad critics more harshly than bad writers. So we're a little over 2 pages. Now we've got to make some judicious cuts. So right here, beautiful lines. He's saying what affects our hearts is not the exactness of peculiar parts, does not a lip or eye we beauty call, but the joint force and full result of all. So he's giving a recipe to the critic to become great. However, I believe that unless the line defends this and really implies heavily on this, or actually defends this as well, I don't think we should include it. So I think we should get rid of this. So I'm gonna just exit out, and I'm gonna literally just scroll way down, and just put that way down there. And then whoever thinks a faultless piece to see thinks what never was, never is, nor ever shall be. This we might put in the conclusion, but again, I don't think this defends our specific thesis. I think it might defend the first half and giving advice to critics, but I don't think it's enough, even though it's a great quote. And that's the secret, I think. One of the main secrets is, I don't know if it's a secret, but it's all about defending the thesis. Defending the thesis and clarity are extremely important. And they will have a dramatic effect on your grade. And both should be your primary considerations. Okay, so as I've said before. All right, so double meaning. In every work, we're at the writer's end. Okay, so this is a little bit bad, I think. So there's a double meaning here. He's sort of saying that this sort of makes the same point that we made in the previous paragraph, where we're saying that, look, we're giving advice to the critic to become, better, but we're still sort of heralding the writer as being above the critic, just in general, just with the language. And this does it even more. Now, if we're arguing exactly the same thing, then I think we should omit this. However, we're actually arguing a little bit more because this is a double meaning. So I think we're making a more interesting argument. In every work, regard the writer's end, which could be the end of the work. It could be their end goal, their end mission, or it could be just standing at the end, like turning around, looking back, and looking at the whole book or the whole poem. So just regard that, like keep that in mind. Keep one of those three things in mind, or all of them in mind, because there are multiple meanings there. That word "end," but also since none can compass more than they intend. So what does none mean? So none can mean no books, no poems can compass more than they intend. But also it could mean the critic, since no critic can compass, can be able to sort of geographically place, can sort of can really measure and assess accurately more than the author intends. And also compass, it's obviously for direction, but also can be for, it seems like, it looks like encompass, since none can encompass more than they intend. So it's sort of saying that no matter how well the critic writes his criticism or his literary review, or his critique, uh, it's you're never going to be better than the author, and that's crucial because that defends our thesis. Digging into these meanings, that defends our thesis. It's saying that, look, even when it's giving, advice, even when he's giving advice to the critic, he's still saying, like, and none kind of looks like no one also, since no one can compass more than they intend. Or none, since none. So it's a little bit of a stretch in the sense of we're going to have to talk about sort of what we talked about here, which I don't write about in every single essay. You don't always write about, oh, Pope can be saying this or this. Where's this section? Right here. The 10 to 1. It doesn't always happen. But we mentioned it. There's two potential ways to read it, at least. So we're sort of doing the same thing here. And you know what? It's Pope. It's Pope and it's poetry. So it's not a surprise that we're going to have multiple meanings that we're going to be trying to pick apart. So the last thing I want to say about this is that an educator, if you pull this off well, an educator will give you a lot of credit because you're not just taking one reading. I think really advanced analysis, literary analysis, speaking of critics, really advanced literary analysis and really advanced essay writing really, you really see that. I think educators really see that if they see that the student is really pushing when it comes to their explication of poems and words and phrases and, really just pushing, just trying to really dig and not going so far that there's nothing there. You're just defending nothing. You're just way overboard. And also, these 3 lines, like, we might even spend a full page talking about these three lines. And if you're going to spend that long talking about 3 lines, you'd better be defending the thesis, both parts. And I believe that they are sort of emphasize, defending both parts. But also, you've better have multiple readings because you don't have that much. You can't really make, one reading, one explication, or one interpretation, and write a page or 3/4 of a page. You just can't. There's just no way, even if you wanted to. But yeah, if we wanted to write 3/4 of a page, I think this could easily be 3/4 of a page. So yeah, so let's look at that. So we're gonna work on that. So let's well, yeah, we'll remember these for next time. But yeah, exalts the author, sort of talks down to critic a bit. And if the means be just, the conduct true, applause in spite of trivial faults is due. So here, does this defend our thesis? Does it defend the fact that the critic is, bad critics are worse than bad writers? No, it doesn't. Again, this goes to the first half of our thesis, but it doesn't really do much for the second half. So we want to put the best quotes, the best, strongest quotes. Otherwise, there's this line in Hollywood. I took some screenwriting classes in school, and they always say you got to kill your babies. It doesn't mean kill your babies, but it means like you have to cut the stuff that you love if it helps your story, if it helps your movie, if it helps your screenplay, if it helps your characterization. You have to cut it. If it's a scene that's awesome, but it doesn't move the story forward, but the dialogue is so great, 90, 98 times out of 100, you got to cut it. Maybe a couple times if you're an auteur or you raise the money yourself. I don't know. I mean, there's obviously exceptions, but um, basically it's saying, don't be afraid to kill your babies. It's the same thing with any work, right? It's like you've gotta you've gotta be beholden to the output of your work and not be beholden to, oh, this is my idea, it's so precious, um, and you have to innovate, um, and so you know yeah, you just can't be too precious with any work. I mean, in business, you got to always think about the customer and where the demand is. Even if you love certain features, but customers don't like it or don't care about it, you might have to cut the feature. So I think it works in multiple fields, including essay writing. Okay, so shaming language, public faction doubles private hate. What I like about this, guys, is it's different because he's not using shaming language. He doesn't have like bullying language. So since we're bringing up sort of a new, fresh point, a new, fresh angle, and looking at a quote in sort of a new, fresh way, saying, "Hey, here's an instance of shaming language." Like even Pope like stoops down to shaming bad critics or critics that speak ill of writers. You know, um, yeah, and actually, it sort of implies that even if a writer is bad, but the critic, you know, and the critic writes a bad review, that this critic um, should not be surprised if private hate, festers. Um, so even bullies, perhaps good or accurate critics who might merely write a bad review, inaccurate and bad review. Now, hopefully, all these notes are way worse than what we translate them to in terms of the essay. But yeah, I just dump all this stuff out here and just make sure the overall, if it's something that I might forget, I always, I recommend you guys like write this stuff out, whether in a notebook or online, um, on, Docs or Word or Open Office, whatever. So, but yes, so hopefully we'll clean this up. And but yeah, I don't mind just getting this stuff out there. Okay, so here we go. And here are the final lines. These monsters critics with your darts engage. Here point your thunder and exhaust your rage. So he calls them monsters. So even in the last lines, if you're wondering, if you're on the fence, so yeah. So even if we can put this in quotes, like even if the reader was wondering, or sort of on the fence about Pope's, you know, um, bias, against critics, etc. That this these uh, these closing lines make it pretty obvious. So that's important, and that's another reason why, especially in poetry, if you can quote the first few lines and the last few lines. Well, here's the first few lines of part one, and then the last few lines of part two, which is why in our thesis we said parts one parts, part one and part two. It generally helps to bookend. It generally helps create a stronger argument. I think that the teacher gives you some credit because you've thought of how to look at the bookends, but you obviously don't want to miss obvious things. So the obvious question that I think a lot of people would ask who are trying to play devil's advocate on these essays are you know, especially if someone read them extremely well or knows every single um, line and every single word, or they've studied this poem or that poem, and they're just really is that maybe I missed something obvious, by not being able to read every single line perfectly or read every single word perfectly. Well, I'll tell you this, in by doing what I'm doing and by asking questions, doing the rough drafts, talking to your teacher, making sure that your thesis is solid and defensible, and just doing the heavy work. Um, I haven't had that issue, and I think that I think that as long as you understand enough of the poem and what's going on, and what the tone is and what the message is in each of these parts or each of these stanzas, then I think that you've got enough ammo to really go out and try to try to write a formidable essay. Um, it's really rare that you're gonna get something that has like 15 or 30 or 80 different detours that are all sort of not that are nuanced, but that you're gonna expect to know the nuance of. Like, you have to you have to have faith, like your hard work and all of that, like that you'll be able to be competitive, at least competitive enough, um in terms of your writing abilities, or at least in terms of your thinking abilities, because most of the time, as we saw with the Walt Whitman poem, if you guys took a look at that, at those videos, I mean, it was pretty obvious. Like, this, it's not like there's going to be like 200 different types of thesis statements that all argue something totally different. Like, you're going to argue very similar arguments. So I think um, that if you could just argue it better, then you're going to earn a solid mark. So I think this is also, I think that this is also something that might be argued by a lot of other students. Now, I want to be even more nuanced because I don't want the stress of doing parts 1, 2, and 3. It's a very long poem. That might really, and it might really weaken our arguments because now we have to trim our number of quotes, and there are some really good quotes in parts 1 and 2. There's just a lot of reasons, but also, again, we talked about the allusions, all these heroes and other texts that he's alluding to. And I didn't want to make it like this long list. I mean, if you're going to mention 2, you might as well mention all 22. It's just, it's when it gets challenging, if your brain can't wrap, if you can't wrap your brain around how to get into an argument or how to get into a specific stanza or part or even character, then just omit that from your essay. Figure out a way to omit that from your essay. If there are 3 main characters, but one of the characters you can't write about, or you have no, you don't feel like you have much worthy to say that's gonna be interesting, then just find a way to cut them out, and only talk about what you're strong at. And that's why I think, and also what's cool too is that I can almost guarantee you most students who write their thesis for this, they're not going to have this nuance. So we're either going to get points or we're going to lose points for mentioning that. Again, this is why you want to ask beforehand. But it's a risk also. I think it's also a good risk. I think teachers give you credit. It's like, hey, he or she is swinging. trying to throw some nuance into the thesis statement. But also here, I can almost guarantee you that most students are not going to say, I'm going to pick parts 1 and 2. I think they're either gonna pick one part or one stanza or the whole poem. I'm not certain, but I actually think that it might make our essay stand out even more because they're saying, hey, we're only gonna talk about parts 1 and 2, which is okay because you can choose. You don't have to go the obvious route of like, oh, I have to talk about the whole thing, or I have to talk about every theme, or I have to talk about, 3 or 4 different ideas. It's like, nah, you get to pick the thesis, and that's really where your essay starts. And that's really the beauty of writing essays is it starts and ends with a good thesis statement. And I think keeping all that stuff in mind, I think, can be helpful. I don't want to write about all those illusions. There's so many of them, and I wouldn't know which ones to pick, and I wouldn't know where to. I understand this. I understand talking about writer's end, the 2 or 3 different meanings that it can be, and then compass, how it can be compass or encompass, or none can be no critic, or no author himself or herself, or none in terms of no poem or no book can encompass more than the author intended, or since no critic. I think I mentioned that, but yeah. So I like that. That's something that I know how to get in. I know how to argue. It's sort of something, and I think that the more essays you write, the more confident you're going to get at being able to figure this stuff out quickly and say, oh, this is going to add a page. This is going to add, da da da. And just like I did right now, I just cut out a couple of quotes that I really like that are awesome quotes, but because they don't add to our thesis. So yeah, and just knowing that this is going to be at least half a page, at least, maybe even up to a page. And then the bullying, and then we just added this. I think that's a big plus. And then here, boom. All right, so let's go over this real quick. And then monsters, critics. He's just saying in general. He's putting them in the same 2 words. Monsters, comma, critics. You guys are you monsters. With your darts, engage, your thunder, your rage. He's ascribing them, these like murderous weapons and thunder, and rage, and exhaust your rage with your pen. Your thunder meaning like your pen, and your just your anger. And then yet shun their fault, who scandalously nice, will needs mistaken an author and device. Um, those 2 lines, I think I like them, but I think it's so much. I can see the way in to argue these 2 lines and these 2 lines, especially the last 2, right? All seems infected that the infected spy, as all looks yellow to the jaundiced eye. All seems infected that the infected see, right? That people who are already infected, they're projecting, right? So if someone's already bitter, then everything they look at is they're gonna use that filter of like bitterness. All seems infected that the infected spy, as all looks yellow to the jaundiced eye. If someone's jaundiced, or if they have jaundiced eye, it's like it's at a wacky angle, and it's and jaundice sort of implies like yellowness. I know it implies like unhealthy, but if someone's also jaundiced, I think it like jaundice is a health condition, but I think that jaundiced a jaundiced eye implies like a bitter eye, like it's not like polite and gentle, and it's just bitter. Um, so as all looks yellow, as all looks bad and ugly, and so these were his last 2 lines. He's talking smack about the critic again. So that's even more stronger evidence that he maligns bad critics more harshly than he maligns bad writers. And maybe at the end here we might talk about he's just maligning critics. He might be maligning critics in general. Even though he's talking about, I don't know if we're gonna make that argument. We don't have to make the argument. That's the other thing, is you don't have to argue past your thesis. You can just argue your thesis. I think arguing past your thesis, unless you know how to pull it off, sometimes it might, it might not work. And that's really the big point that I want to make with all these videos is sometimes you might try something and it won't work. Or you might question, like, should I go for the home run here, or should I just back off and go for the double or the triple? And I think we should just go for the double or the triple. I mean, there's so many things right now that are inhibiting us. We can't even use the word author. We have to keep saying Pope, Pope, Pope. We have another risk that we're taking here, talking about this, and then so we're taking a risk when we're not sure if we're reading this right. Like, what if the teacher's saying, no, you read it wrong. There's only one way to read it, and you missed it, or both of these are wrong, or only this is right. I mean, there's just a lot of potential. We're taking risks. So if you're already taking a lot of risks in the essay, and then here, we're really pushing in terms of reading, but then maybe you shouldn't argue past the thesis. Here, I'm not going to argue past the thesis. All I'm going to say is whether or not he refers to good critics or bad critics. I mean, all critics or bad critics. Regardless, he's being very, very condemning. Very condemning. Last words of Act 2. Regardless of whether referring to all critics or just bad ones. Either way, solid textual evidence. I haven't used that phrase before. Textual evidence that he is lambasting critics. Much more than authors. Here. So that's a solid argument, I think. All right, and then we can figure out what quote we want to put in the conclusion. But yeah, this is going to be at least a few more pages, and I will see you guys at the next video.